Girls, did you have a guy that you wished you said yes to when he asked you out? Please leave a comment where you are watching in the world. Story 1. My grandma's story. Back in high school, she met a guy. According to her, he was the full package, intelligent, fairly good-looking, and immensely humorous. You could tell by the way she talked about him that he wasn't just your average teenage crush. He was someone who stood out. She admired him, liked him even, and from what she said, it was pretty clear the feeling was mutual. It wasn't just a fleeting teenage infatuation. There was something real there, something that could have turned into one of those love stories people recount with stars in their eyes. But here's where it gets interesting. One day, the inevitable happened. This guy finally worked up the courage to ask her out. Now, if this were the part of the story where young romance blossomed and they lived happily ever after, it wouldn't have been half as memorable. Instead, my grandma, aware of her feelings for him and equally aware of his for her, turned him down. Just like that. No drama, no second thoughts, just a flat-out rejection. Now let me tell you, as she's recounting this story, my curiosity was at an all-time high. I mean, why would she reject someone she clearly liked, someone who ticked all the boxes? And then, of course, there's the twist. As if setting up a punchline, my grandma launched into a reflection about how this guy went on to lead a successful life. He became well off, had a wonderful career, and seemingly lived the kind of life people aspire to. She spoke about him with a mix of admiration and humor, as if she was acknowledging the irony of her decision. Naturally, I couldn't resist asking the obvious question. Well, if you liked him so much, why did you reject him? And her answer, delivered with a perfectly straight face and that classic grandma wit, was, I couldn't date a ginger. Cue my stunned silence followed by uncontrollable laughter. It was such an unexpected punchline, and the matter-of-fact way she said it made it all the more hilarious. There was no regret, no lingering what-ifs, just an unapologetic declaration of her teenage priorities. Story 2. One time, I said no because I was too busy with my exams. My head was buried deep in my books, completely consumed by the looming weight of deadlines, formulas, and chapters that seemed endless. He had walked into the room, his tone casual, but his eyes hopeful, as he asked me something I don't even fully remember now. Maybe it was a simple question, like going out for a coffee or taking a break for a walk. Or maybe it was something more important, something he had mustered courage to ask. But at that moment, I didn't care enough to notice. The timing was all wrong. My mind was a whirlwind of equations, notes, and the pressure of an upcoming exam that felt like it could define my entire future. My response was curt, automatic. No, I said without even glancing up. Just one word, said quickly and sharply, like swatting away an insect buzzing too close. I didn't think about how it might sound to him or how it might feel. I only thought about the pages still left unread and the hours slipping away. Looking back now, I regret saying no. Not just because of what it meant to him, but because of what it cost me. That moment comes back to me often, a small, sharp pang of guilt that cuts through the haze of those exam days. I wonder if he felt dismissed, unimportant, or maybe even hurt. Did he see my preoccupation as indifference? Did it make him feel like his request, whatever it was, didn't matter to me? I'll never know because I never asked. I was too wrapped up in my own world. Story 3. Had a guy ask me out in high school, really fun guy, very nice, funny, athletic, smart, and good-looking. I turned him down because I knew he had already had sex, and I wasn't ready to have sex at that time. It wasn't about his morals, I did desperately want to date him, but I just felt like I would never be able to make him happy, and I was embarrassed that I hadn't had sex. A few years later in college, I ran into him when I was home on break. He's still the perfect guy, hasn't changed a bit. I screwed the pooch on that one. Looking back, I can still remember the exact moment he asked me. We were standing by my locker after school, and he leaned against the metal door like it was the easiest thing in the world. He smiled at me, that easygoing, confident smile that made him so magnetic. And when he asked if I wanted to go out sometime, my heart did this little somersault. For a split second, I felt like the luckiest girl in the world. But then the doubts crept in. I started overthinking everything. I knew he was more experienced than I was, and even though he never gave me a reason to think he'd pressure me or judge me, I just couldn't shake the feeling that I wouldn't measure up. I worried that dating him would expose all the things I was insecure about. The fact that I hadn't even kissed a guy, let alone done anything more. The idea of having to admit that terrified me. So instead of taking a chance, I panicked and said no. I can still see the way his face fell for just a moment before he recovered, flashing me another smile and saying something like, "No worries, maybe another time." He made it so easy to brush off, but I couldn't stop thinking about it afterward. I wondered if I'd made a mistake, but I convinced myself it was for the best. I told myself that someone like him would never really be happy with someone like me, that he'd get bored or disappointed or move on to someone else. It felt safer to avoid the risk altogether, but the regret lingered. Even years later, I couldn't fully shake it. When I ran into him during college, all those old feelings came rushing back. He hadn't changed a bit, still funny, still charming, still the guy I could see myself falling for if I'd just let myself. We talked for a while, catching up like old friends, but the whole time I couldn't stop thinking about what might have been. I kept wondering if he ever thought about me the same way, or if I was just a distant memory to him. I walked away from that conversation kicking myself all over again. It's not like I expected him to still be interested, but part of me hoped, in some irrational way, that he might be. Story 4. Two guys come to mind. Guy 1 was so sweet, and I did like him, but he was going too fast for my liking, saying "I love you" too soon, etc. He somehow lost heart in pursuing a relationship with me when I told him to slow down, as it was making me uncomfortable. At the time, I thought I was doing the right thing by setting boundaries, but I sometimes wonder if I could have approached it differently, found a way to slow things down without completely shutting him out. We rekindled our thing a few years later, but it wasn't quite the same, and it didn't amount to anything serious. The spark was still there, but it had dimmed somehow, as if the timing had passed us by. He's now in a long-distance relationship with a beautiful girl. From what I can see from the outside of their relationship, he's a very sweet and devoted boyfriend. He showers her with love and attention, and I sometimes think I missed out. Not in a jealous way, but in a wistful what-if kind of way. It's funny how seeing someone else receive the love you once turned down can make you question whether you should have held on to it a little tighter. And then there's Guy 2. Guy 2 was someone I really liked. He was funny, charismatic, and had this effortless charm that made it impossible not to notice him. But he was also always talking to and about other girls, so I didn't think he liked me that much. I told myself he was just being friendly, that I was reading too much into the little moments we shared. Eye contact held a second too long, teasing comments that made my stomach flip, the way he always seemed to find an excuse to be near me. One day, he asked if I'd go out with him, but it was set up to seem like a joke. He said it in that light, casual way people do when they're testing the waters, but don't want to seem too invested. I panicked. I didn't want to appear too eager and vulnerable, so I laughed it off and said, "No, that's ridiculous." I regretted it almost immediately, but I convinced myself it was for the best. If he'd been serious, he wouldn't have made it seem like a joke, right? That's what I told myself. I found out later that he was serious, but he wanted to seem casual. This happened in high school, hence all these stupid games. By the time I realized the truth, he had already moved on to other girls. He went into a relationship with one of them, his first girlfriend, and it hit me harder than I expected. I kept wondering if things would have been different if I had just been brave enough to say yes. When they eventually broke up, it devastated him. I saw him hurt in a way that made me ache for him, even though I knew I wasn't in any position to comfort him. And then, sometime after we got together, I thought maybe it was fate giving us a second chance, but in hindsight, I think I was just his rebound. It was doomed from the start. He wasn't over her, and I was too caught up in the idea of what we could have been to see it clearly. The whole time we were together, I kept thinking about how different things might have been if I'd said yes the first time. I wondered if I could have been his first love, the one he poured all of that raw, unfiltered emotion into. Would he have loved me that much? Would I have meant more to him if I'd taken the chance when it first came along? I'll never know, and that's the part that stings the most. Story 5. I did this event at the Queen Mary and could not stop staring at this guy. I just thought he was the most gorgeous thing on the planet. My event coordinator noticed and ended up bringing him over the last night when they had a ball. We walked around the deck, and when I told him how I had slipped and almost fell, he's like swooped me into a dip and said like this. He tried to teach me how to dance, which he was great at, told me about how he traveled and loved school and all the same things as me. It was the best/most romantic night of my life. I had to go back to my group, and he stopped me on the stairs to kiss me and said, "This is the last chance I am going to have to do this. What do you want me to do?" I told him I needed him to keep walking, because at the time I was in an on-again, off-again relationship with a total scumbag. I think about him all the time, and beat myself up a lot for passing on someone so great for someone who didn't care about me. If I could redo one thing in my life, it'd be that night. Damn it. I know I am a complete dumbass. He was unreal in how wonderful he was. Yes, I fully admit to being that girl who picked the douche, but it was my first relationship and lesson was definitely learned. After stewing on this and beating myself up, I think I am going to try to find him. He has a pretty uncommon name luckily. Last I heard he had a girlfriend, but we'll see. Story 6. Relevant first kiss story. Really attractive and popular girl flirted with me in high school, and I always played it cool because I thought she was making fun of me. I didn't want to be a big baby and make a big deal, so I just went with it and tried to be uninterested or witty. We hang out and she kisses me. It was my first kiss, and I was super nervous anyway, and was still paranoid she was making fun of me and trying to make me uncomfortable and nervous, so she could tell her friends, LOL, he is so noob with chicks. So she gently pulls away after a minute, and I laugh. I thought I would beat her to the punch, but instead she cried, and I felt really bad and had to try to convince I liked her and was glad she kissed me. Sorry everyone, I didn't mean to be the op that never delivered. No, so it was a cold winter night, and we parked in some empty parking lot, and the windows are all fogged up. We're 16, for years ago. It's late, don't know where else to go but want to be together. So she cried for a minute and thought I was laughing at her. So I tell her that I wasn't laughing at her. I was nervous because first kiss, she doesn't believe me. So I lean over and hold her cheek and kiss her several more times and tell her it's okay. She comes around, and we make out in wonderful teenage awkwardness. Then she drives me home. We hung out after that day and had fun times. Looking back, it was a 500 days of summer situation of sorts. She had a relationship, but liked me and wanted to have fun with me. I wanted anybody that wanted me, but especially her. So she wants a fun, carefree time, and I wanted a lot more. We split ways when she went to college, but it was friendly, I guess. Now I've gotten more attractive, wooter/fitness, and a little more confident, but I've never really dated anyone since then. I can rest now, knowing I've delivered. Story 7. I'm a guy who had the same issue. I was commonly the butt of that type of joke, so every time I heard someone was into me, I thought someone was trying to set me up for a laugh. I didn't have a single date all through high school. Then about a week after I graduated, a girl basically chased me down and beat it into my skull that she wanted me. That was the first time I really thought someone could find me attractive. I still barely believed it for a while, and when that relationship went to shit, I went right back to that thought and didn't date anyone for almost 2 years. I think back now, and I see so much time and potential wasted. I was lean, athletic, smart, a little awkward, but usually fairly funny. I had a lot going for me, and I just didn't believe it. So depression, then weight gain as soon as I quit wrestling in college. Don't get me wrong, my life is fucking awesome now. Got a great GF, a good job, and live in paradise, but there was a lot of time I spent sitting around wondering what the hell was wrong with me, and the biggest thing that was wrong was my complete lack of confidence. Story 8. It was freshman year of college. I made eye contact with some random guy from across the quad. He walked over, sat next to me, and we had a short conversation. He invited me to his room before my friends showed up and dragged me away. Turned out we lived in the same building. I went to his room, and we talked and joked as though we'd known each other our entire lives. And constantly, this kick-ass engineer student was complimenting me, the mediocre biology kid, on how smart I was. He and I ran into each other several times, and there was always a palpable tension between us. But I was in a long-distance relationship at the time, and I never went for it. I turned down the only guy to ever give me butterflies in my stomach and make me smile like an idiot. Story 9. I worked for several years with Harry. We had a lot of fun at work, and also went out surfing, beach days, mutual friend stuff together too. Only gradually did I realize I was developing genuine feelings for him. I kept all this to myself, of course. He seemed way out of my league, and I didn't want to make our work relationship awkward. Once he asked me if I'd go shopping with him to find some shoes. We went to the mall, found some kicks, and then he asked me if I wanted lunch. I said nah, I wanted to work out before work, so see you later. Didn't understand, he was maybe asking me to lunch as a date until much later. Idiot. We continued to work together and hang as friends though, and we both dated other people. Eventually he left the job to travel and finish school, but still came by to hang out. One night we were all drinking, and we went out back to share a smoke. We were pretty drunk, and I was sitting on this raised box thing, and he stood in front of me and placed his hands on my knees, looked into my eyes and said, "Tinfoil Hardy Pat, I love you." I've never been able to say this before. I love you. I've loved you a long time. And I said, "Okay," handed him the smoke, and went back inside. I didn't know how to reply. I had had inklings that he had feelings for me, but we never came out and said it. I had a boyfriend at the time and wouldn't cheat, so here I am. Harry, if you read this, I love you too. Story 10. I said no to a perfectly lovely guy who was just my type once because I was feeling a bit down and not like I could deal with the world of romance. At the time, I felt so overwhelmed by everything going on in my life that even the idea of starting something new felt exhausting. I convinced myself that I wasn't ready, that I needed to focus on myself and get my head straight before I could even think about dating someone. It wasn't about him, it was about me and where I was emotionally. I mentioned this to my best friend in passing one day, expecting nothing more than a sympathetic nod or maybe a pep talk about putting myself out there. Instead, it transpired that they knew each other. Not just knew each other, they were acquaintances, and my best friend immediately launched into how great he was. Funny, smart, kind, charming, all the things I already knew but had chosen to ignore. My best friend saw something I couldn't see at the time, that I was letting my own insecurities rob me of a chance at happiness. Over the next few weeks, my best friend worked hard to dig me out of my shell. They gently encouraged me, reminding me that I didn't have to dive headfirst into a relationship, but could just meet him for a quick drink and see how it felt. No pressure, just a casual evening to test the waters. Eventually I caved. I told myself it was just one drink, and if I didn't feel anything, then I could walk away and go back to my quiet, insulated world. That quick drink turned into 2 drinks, then dinner, then hours of conversation that neither of us wanted to end. He made me laugh in a way I hadn't laughed in months. He listened, really listened, and made me feel like the most interesting person in the room. It was easy, easier than I ever imagined it could be, and I realized halfway through the evening that I didn't feel so down anymore. I felt hopeful. 2 years later, I walked down the aisle towards him. Standing there, looking into his eyes, I couldn't help but think back to that first conversation and how close I came to missing out on all of it. If my best friend hadn't pushed me, if I hadn't taken that tiny, terrifying step out of my comfort zone, I never would have known what it felt like to love and be loved by someone so perfectly suited to me. Now, we're fulfilling a lifelong dream of mine by living in another country together. We wake up every day surrounded by new experiences, new places to explore, and new adventures to share. It's not always easy, no relationship is, but we tackle the challenges as a team. There's something incredible about knowing that no matter what happens, we're in it together. Sometimes I think about that original no, and how differently things could have turned out if I'd stuck with it. It's a sobering thought. I might have spent years convincing myself that I was better off alone, not realizing what I was missing. Or maybe I would have dated other people, but never found someone who made me feel the way he does, safe, understood, and completely adored. Story 11. In college, there was a guy who asked me out who was weird and annoying, so I said no. Next year, he came back hot as fuck. Turns out he spent all summer working out. I regretted it until I invited him over one night, and he stole my PS3 and my Yoda backpack. I got the Yoda backpack back. He was roommates with a friend of mine. He actually wore the backpack around the next day, and everyone knew it was mine. Uneasy face. I feel like the worst part was the aftermath. I invited him over to hang out, and once I was reminded of his weirdness, I sent him on his way. Then the next day he told everyone we hooked up and wore the backpack as proof. I was known as RHE Campus Slut, and he sold the PS3 and took out my roommate on a date. That was a rough week. Story 12. Wow, I can't believe how relevant this is to my situation. Throwaway just in case he or a friend recognizes this post. Don't want the surprise to be ruined, winky face. I had a really good friend in high school who, to put it lightly, was a man whore. We were really close. He would tell me everything about his sexual escapades with a variety of girls, some I knew and some who were much older. Despite all these conversations, I started to fall for him. Underneath his reputation was someone kind and loving to all his friends. He was the type who would do anything for anyone. He was a great father figure to his younger siblings and was essentially the man of the house. Junior year, he revealed that he was starting to like me. He asked if I would be his date to our friend's annual New Year's party, but I was an assuming, ignorant bitch, and I brushed it off. I was hurt that he would try to get in my pants. I thought I meant more to him than just another girl to mess around with. I never told him how I felt about him. Instead, I cut off ties with him. I started to distance myself from him little by little with no explanation. He would try to talk to me, but I would try my hardest to avoid him altogether. I went away to college, and he stayed in our hometown. After too much time thinking, I realized what I did was immature. Recently, we have started talking again, and I apologized for being a huge bitch. He told me he knew I'd come around again, but I'm happy to know he really does care for me still. He doesn't know it, but I'm going back home tonight for Christmas. I plan on surprising him. I'm going to ask him to be my date to the New Year's party our friend has every year. Story 13. It was my sophomore year of college, and I had a boyfriend, a nice enough guy, but a total stoner without an ounce of ambition. He was away on a weekend get-stoned with my buddy's trip, and I was bored and walking across campus to the Student Union building. It was a cold, blustery weekend, and it was honest to God like something out of a rom-com. I dropped a stack of papers, and they started blowing around, and up runs the football player, dude who'd been flirting with me off and on in one of my classes. He asked me if I wanted to go get some coffee for my poor, freezing hands, and I said what the hell. We opted for cocoa instead, and sat there for nearly 2 hours. It turns out he was an honors student and only played football to get the scholarship he needed. He was funny and really smart and so freaking gorgeous. I couldn't believe he was talking to me. He told me he came to see all my shows. I was a theater major. And he finally asked if he could see me again, really see me. And I wanted to say yes so badly, but I also couldn't cheat on my boyfriend, either. I turned him down, and he told me if I changed my mind, to let him know. I ended up staying with Stoner Boy for another few months, and by then football dude had a girlfriend. I looked him up on Google once a few years back. He ended up becoming a doctor. He chairs the Special Olympics Committee in his hometown, and he seems like he's still a terrific guy. He'll always be one I wish I could go back and say yes to. Story 14. This is my wife's story, but it involves me. We were high school sweethearts, and shortly after we started dating, she was asked to go to a school dance by Larry Fitzgerald. She turned him down, noting she had a boyfriend. When she told me about it that evening, she was surprised to hear my reaction, which was that she fucking blew it. At this point, Larry was already an athletic freak. Even in the 10th or 11th grade, it was clear this guy was going on to big things. As life progressed and my wife and I started a family, Larry's career progressed and he continued to excel. I would occasionally remark to my gal that Larry had just hit another milestone, killing it at Pitt, winning awards and so on. When the draft approached and he was projected as a top 3 pick, I again pointed out that she blew it. She would always respond with, "But I was with you," or "He was kinda weird anyway." When he was selected third by the Cards, I again pointed out how she blew it. She shrugged it off. A couple weeks later, I walk into the kitchen, and she's holding the sports page. I ask what she's reading, and she just says, "I fucking blew it," handed me the paper and walked away. The headline said something along the lines of "Fitzgerald agrees the $60 million contact." Story 15. I'm a guy speaking for a girl, but this story always breaks my heart. I asked a girl out while she was a waitress at a pizza place. She agreed to go out as friends, and I spent the next 6 months plus politely picking her up, taking her to lunch or dinner, and doing my best to not pressure her away from me. I was in the friend zone with no signs of escaping. My boss gave me great tickets to go see the SF Giants at Candlestick Park, so I invited her. She agreed. Neither of us were baseball fans, but it seemed like it would be a great experience. It wasn't. It was freezing. We had no idea what was happening, and when I suggested we leave, she agreed. I drove her home, and as I was walking her to the door, I grasped her hand, the first time we had held hands. She yanked her hand back. I remember the words very clearly, "It's too fast." Okay. Message received. She had moved a distance away from me, so I let things go. I stopped calling her, and she made no effort to contact me. Goodbye, Deborah. Several years later, I had met somebody else, and had actually become engaged. I got a phone call from Deborah. She was hoping to get together. I told her that I was in a serious relationship, so perhaps it wasn't a good idea. We chit-chat a bit and said our goodbyes. A week or so later, I got a card from her explaining how much she regretted pushing me away, and that she considered me the one that got away. The funny things is that I was so madly in love with her. To this day, I think of her. My wife is amazing, and I am so very lucky, but I always wonder what would have happened. Story 16. I worked several summers in high school, and after graduation at the customer service desk at a family-owned grocery store in my hometown, check cashing, Western Union, Lotto, smokes, etc. The last year I did this before I left for college, Very regularly, this Hispanic guy my age would come in to cash his paycheck. I didn't speak more than a few words of Spanish, and he didn't seem to speak any English, but oh man, was he hot. I'd get really flustered every time he came in. It seemed like he made an effort to come in when I was working, because he'd come in almost every week even when my schedule would change, and we'd both just smile and sort of alternate between staring at each other and avoiding eye contact while I cashed his check. After a while, he'd come in just to buy a candy bar or something and come to my desk instead of the regular checkout lanes. I didn't think it would go anywhere since I didn't speak any Spanish and he didn't speak any English, but there we were, every week. I'd look forward to seeing him and just melt every time he came in. And then one day he came up to my desk and in the most adorably broken English I could never imitate, he asked me if I wanted to go out after work. I was so ridiculously flustered. I was so shy and so socially awkward and so insecure that I'd convinced myself that never in a million years would this fairy tale story of teen romance, despite the language barrier, actually become anything more than a fantasy. To this day, about 13 years later, I still kick myself for being so stupid. When he asked me like an idiot, I stammered and said something about not being allowed to date customers, which is complete BS BTW. My dad met my mom in that exact store while he was checking. The cute Hispanic guy looked crushed, and inwardly I was crushed by my own stupidity/social awkwardness. He didn't even buy whatever it was he was trying to buy, left the Snickers bar on the counter and left. I went home after my shift and just cried. I told my dad about it, he worked at the store too, and I remember him laughing at me in this sympathetic way. I must have looked really devastated. And he said that next time he came in, I should just be brave and try to talk to him again and tell him I'd been mistaken about the rules about dating employees. But I never ever saw him again. And then I went to college, and even though I worked at the store again between semesters, I never saw him again. I still remember this guy, and I still hate myself for being so stupid. I speak no Spanish, and he spoke no English, but super hot Hispanic guy and I crushed really hard on each other for weeks at my job between high school and college. It was like a strange modern fairy tale. He gets the balls to ask me out in English, and I stupidly reject him because I was a super socially awkward and insecure teenager. Never saw him again. Still regret it 13 years later.